Welcome, folks, to the Knights of the Wrong Table podcast. I'm John.
I am Randall.
And we have our special guest, Colten. Thank you for joining us today, Colten.
Thank you. Hey, I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah, so today's topic at hand, we're going to get into kind of the origins of the Orthodox Church. And what many people may not know was a kind of, you don't want to say a contending force, because there was a lot of proponents that it was one and the same, but the Gnostic tradition that parallels the origins of the Orthodox Church. So Colten, thank you for joining us. Colten grew up a Pentecostal pastor's kid and went to school to study theology, and from there led him to what you might not consider to be the traditional path, having grown up where you've grown up.
So that definitely took me down a strange path. I grew up like in the oneness, holiness, Pentecostal tradition. I'm not sure how familiar you are with all of those. the distinctions get like more and more narrow. Yeah. So, like the Pentecostal movement starts, and then you have the 1/3 of the Assemblies of God leave the Assemblies of God over this issue of the Trinity and Jesus' name only baptism. So they reject the doctrine of the Trinity, and they essentially reinvent a slightly differentiated form of Sabellianism, or like modal monarchianism or modalism, and out of thin air. Like they don't have like a concept of it in history. They just read the scriptures and get there on their own. And they believe you have to be baptized in Jesus' name only to be saved. So if you went down under the water and they said Father, Son, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,
didn't work.
Didn't count. No, you're going to hell in a handbasket with gasoline-soaked underpants. And my mission was to like get people saved, right? And so like the only thing for us, the worst version of that was Catholic or Orthodox. Like the worst, other than being an atheist, worse than that was being Catholic or Orthodox, because that was where we saw all of that Trinitarian heresy begin for them, right? So when I went to ORU, I went to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is like a mecca of charismatic evangelical.
I was just out there. I literally drove right past there like 4 days ago.
Did you see the praying hands?
I did.
And he flipped off Mark Mullen's plumbing trucks.
Yeah, I passed Mark Mullen's truck on the way there too on the freeway.
I've met Mark Wayne Mullen a couple of times because we have a number of mutual friends.
Wow.
And he's a total loser in real life. Just
yes.
You know how he got his name? Like he only even has his name because his mom is too lazy for him to have a different name, because she had two brothers, Mark and Wayne, and she wasn't sure which one to name him after, so she just put both at the hospital, and she was going to change it to one later, and she never did. So now he's Mark Wayne Mullins. Like he's got two first names, Nepo baby. But yeah, gosh. So you know why the praying hands are so? You see how tight they are clasped together?
No, why is it? Explain the relevance.
Because we've got a penny in there, and he doesn't want to let it go. Right? He's got your money, and so he's holding it tight. Or Oral Roberts. Yes. That's what happened to my money. Right? I went $180,000 into debt getting degrees in theology at Oral Roberts. And so when I went there, though, guys, I went as like I thought of myself as a missionary. Like in my mind, everybody there was unsaved. Everybody there was going to hell because they'd been baptized wrong. They believed in in three gods, not one God, was my understanding.
Because hell's hot and forever's a long time, right?
Oh, a long, long time. And so I went to try to convince people to get rebaptized in Jesus' name and to win them over to our truth. And so, I started studying church history, and by mistake, really. I was a political science major, but I had friends that were like, dude, this church history 1 class is like blowing our minds. Like, you should really come into this class. And so I did. We had this really great professor, Dr. James Shelton, who's, PhD, great scholar, published all over the place. But he's a Catholic Pentecostal. He's a unique guy. He's not like, some people say charismatic Catholic. He's like, I'm a Pentecostal Catholic, because he was a Pentecostal, got converted to Catholicism, and he maintained both of those really well somehow. Like even like the cultural idiosyncrasies of both of those movements, he like embodied them.
Interesting.
But as I start reading about the early church, I start to realize, whoa, what they're saying is like very different than what we're saying. And I was taught, like, we call ourselves apostolic Pentecostals because we believe, if it was good for Paul and Silas, it's good enough for me. And we don't want none of this extra stuff that they lumped in. We just want to get down to the truth. That was where my first time learning about things that really started to shift my perspective. And I spent my next couple of years flirting with converting to Catholicism and Orthodoxy, thinking that that was moving me in a progressive light. Because I think when you're a kid, anything that is subversive to like your cultural norm feels progressive, whether it's progressive or not. It just feels like different. And so it was subversive, and I was like into that. And so
you're going on your hero's journey at this point, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really popular, especially for young adults that are like trying to figure out stuff out. You see what you've been taught, what you've been known to upbring, and you kind of get exposed to the subversive, quote unquote, side of it, and it's different and new, and yet you don't know why it's outlawed or black labeled to talk about. So you start looking into it. Absolutely.
Right. And it feels like truth. Everything you learn outside of that feels like truth because, well, why was this held back? Why doesn't anybody know about this? And I also at this time had my mind exploded in politics because we have, you have to live in the dorms all 4 years at ORU, and there's this really strong dorm culture. You have student chaplains and RAs on every floor, and then there's a student head chaplain who oversees the chaplains in that dorm. I went into his room. He's a senior. So I'm 17 when I got to college, right? So I'm a baby. This guy's like 21. He's so cool and loved God. And I heard him pray, and I felt like the anointing on him. And I walked into his dorm room, Randall and John, and there was a poster. There's like '07. There were posters of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama on his wall, and I was like, "What is this? Is this a prank? Like what?"
Shook.
I was shook, and no, turned out he was a Democrat. I never entertained the possibility that a Christian could be a Democrat. And so
nor did I growing up either. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like truly like mind blowing. It was scared me at first, like I was the kind of kid, I heard another senior that I look up to say, "What the hell?" And like my world crumbled. I went back to my dorm roommate and I was like, you can't put anybody on a pedestal, man. Like, I was like, I really was shook.
Said AT double hockey sticks, man.
Yeah, man. And all these things kind of converged into this like dialectic of transition through every next couple of years of my life. I'm 36 now. And I mean, what I think today is radically different than what I thought when I was 30 about a lot of stuff. Not like completely different, but just like, I don't want to say an evolution because that implies that I think, it was like the right change. Not necessarily. It was just like that next dialectic shift, right? It still contains the seeds of what it was before, but it becomes something new. You have your thesis, antithesis produces synthesis.
Yep. The Hegelian dialect, right?
Yeah, man. And so it led me through all these different paths. And so today, like you said earlier, I think you said I call myself a Christian atheist. I actually even think of myself as a Pentecostal atheist, even more specifically. Like to me, if my professor can be a Pentecostal Catholic, why can't I be a Pentecostal atheist? I know it's a little different, but yeah. So
I have kind of a similar funny story about walking into a room and seeing posters of Hillary Clinton, but a little different. We obviously come from different upbringings, but John and I went to a predominantly Lutheran school. We went to Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, Washington. And I remember I would go. I kind of had a reputation at the university for if you needed to score some marijuana, you'd give me a call.
Nice.
And I remember like people. So there were some certain people that were very religious at the university that went there because they were religious and they were studying, Lutheranism or they were studying, New Testament theology, and they would give me just the wide berth, socially. And I would go every now and then. We had John. Do you remember what time chapel was? It was like early in the morning.
I only went the once when we went to I went to chapel once when they took us there as freshmen. So I don't know.
Wow.
So I went a couple of times, especially during the later times when I was at university, just kind of dark place, not really mentally feeling really well. So I would go there just kind of just try to feel better.
You
And I
also
remember,
came from a Lutheran family too, right? So it's
yeah,
kind of like
absolutely,
home.
heavily
Yeah.
Lutheran.
Yeah.
And so I would go there and just kind of hang out and just take the morning as like a relaxation type of thing. And I would see these people and they would see me there. And then all of a sudden I started getting a lot more customers from that section of the university that would always give me,
Like,
but
wait,
seeing
aren't you
me
trying to
there.
get your MDiv or something like that?
Well, my point is them seeing me there opened up their eyes to being like, well, wait a minute, you can be a marijuana user and still be religious. You can be a marijuana user and still, it was that same kind of thing where like you wouldn't think a person who practices, a religion is using
Yeah,
cannabis. And
totally.
so it opened a lot more people's eyes, and I think it was really funny because I ended up making a lot of friends in that group of the
A lot of
university.
friends and a lot of money.
Hey,
Hey.
got to pay those college bills somehow, man.
Dude, isn't it interesting how just it kind of being exposed to something, it doesn't even have to be an argument. Just exposure to something can radically transform the way you see and think about the world and the possibilities that are available.
Absolutely, and
Because you
especially at a
see
young
people as
age
people.
in university, and you get to see where people are like, yeah, you see people as people. You get to see where people are coming from, what brought them both to the same path that you're on now, or the same location or evocation or school study that you are in. It's fun. It's fun to see that entomology of people's ideas.
Yeah, the last couple times that I've been in a church were for some funerals. So before that, I grew up in the local evangelical church here. I didn't really know it was evangelical. Like I didn't really come to understand what the full like political significance of being an evangelical meant until later. I just considered myself like non-denominational. But I did grow up in an evangelical church, and it's striking to see like what that means now, like how I view that now. I'm like, oh, I didn't. Oh, wow, But still, yeah, the last time I was in a church, unlike Randall, was for some funerals, and we actually, it was yesterday. We actually laid to rest our football coach, one of our football coaches at PLU. Randall and I played football there. So rest in peace, Judd. And it was kind of interesting because as I'm listening to this service yesterday, kind of with the lens of what we're going to talk about today with Gnosticism versus Orthodoxy, um, and the language that I guess I heard growing up, but I didn't really pay attention to within the physical body resurrection. Um, right, is actually something that in the service yesterday is explicitly said, right? Like uh, Judd will rise with a physical body amongst Jesus, right, in the path in the home that has been laid out for him. Obviously, then because when we talk about Gnosticism versus Orthodoxy, it's one of the main tenets of the Orthodox faith is that there is the physical aspect of the resurrection, where within Gnosticism, there's kind of I think it's called doetism,
Mm.
that
Yeah.
it is the spiritual aspect of Jesus rather than like the bodily resurrection aspect of Jesus.
Yeah.
So
I think docetism. Okay. I think this is right up your lane. So David Bentley Hart is an Eastern Orthodox theologian. Probably in my estimation, and not just mine, but a lot of other people's, one of the most important living Christian philosophers and theologians. Anytime I make a video about Hart, I get a lot of Orthodox people saying in my comments, David Bentley Hart is not Orthodox. He's a heretic. Now
yeah,
he's not been condemned, right? He's preaching at Fordham University's Orthodox Scholars Preach series like just a couple of weeks ago, right? So clearly he's like good friends with John Baer and other major bishops in the Orthodox Church. He's a layman. So clearly he's not, but there is this kind of dogmatism by Orthodox practitioners, especially in America, that doesn't even seem to exist as powerfully amongst the academics in Orthodoxy. Anyways, Hart,
It's like a tribalism kind of.
yeah, because I
Yeah.
think like we talked about earlier,
we will get into that. Yeah,
people switching into Orthodoxy, like right now, a lot of the young people that are switching into Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism are just wanting to bring their evangelical theology and worldview into a framework that is explicitly feels more authoritarian or rooted in tradition or traditional
Mhm.
family values or
Yeah.
whatever, but really end up negating a lot of the mystical parts of those traditions. But Hart is he's developing pretty systematically over time a uh, a, a theology of Christian monism. So he like fully rejects like the uh, what you would I want to hesitate saying Aquinas or Thomistic, because this is something a lot of Thomistics believe in that I don't think Thomas actually aligned with, despite their misreadings.
Yeah.
This strong, concrete distinction between nature and supernature.
Okay.
And so, he is like, he has this book called "You Are Gods" on nature and supernature, being, consciousness, and bliss, about developing a concept of God that I think actually is rescuing, or not rescuing, but re-legitimizing a lot of the claims and beliefs of early Gnosticism within Christianity, within the Orthodox Church, which is like kind of interesting.
I just got done rereading Elaine Pagels' The Gnostic Gospels, and I first was introduced to Elaine Pagels at PLU, and I didn't really like, because I was still like in my evangelical mindset, and because I was still kind of like you said, you went to school to like, you looked at all these people like to be saved, right? I like went to school with that evangelical worldview, and definitely at that point, I was not there to be challenged. I was there to see all these scholars are just trying to like poke holes in my faith and all this, right? So it's really like on the flip side, coming out of college and then into the world, that I've used that to not really challenge my faith, but I would say personally to enhance my. So there's history within the Gnostic tradition that actually the Gnostics did attend, like they did attend Orthodox churches as well. And that the kind of the schism then comes in from the criticism from, mostly when we talk about the criticism within Gnosticism, it comes from Irenaeus, and how Irenaeus then like tried to root out the Gnostics that were actually in his church, because it was like they went to church within the Orthodoxy, but then had their own thing that they would do kind of in secret as well. Kind of funny because uh, just funny how it's all nested within each other, and how you have these kind of, one side kind of viewed it as a non-competing force, right? Like we're here, but we also, this is also what we believe,
Mhm.
because Gnosticism in and of itself is a pre-Christian movement as well.
Right.
So there's aspects to Gnosticism where they viewed what they believed before the historical Christ, and how that adds to their faith and what they believe. They're like, oh, well, of course, this person who came down and preached that, he was the divine, and gives you a way to salvation, right? Like, of course, that goes along with what we believe is like transcending through the levels of the universe in opposition to the demiurge creator, right?
Mhm.
So,
I think that you're going to
yeah.
find though that a lot of, especially establishing Christian religion at that time, has shared heritage with other local smaller offsprings of that same religion, you could say, for lack of a better word for wording there. um
Yes.
because that has to anchor itself in some form of legitimacy. So you have that bleed through effect where, depending on where these religions take base, what's going to be important to those communities at hand that practice that religion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you want to talk about the development of theology in the early church, I think a lot of people today take a very um, rigid, dogmatic approach to thinking that like things were like more clearly figured out than they are. Hart, oh my God, I cannot just be like the David Bentley Hart guy, but Hart has this great book called
Well, I'm the
Tradition and
Pagels guy,
Apocalypse.
so it's all good.
Nice. Tradition and Apocalypse, where he basically argues that we need to rethink what is meant by the term tradition. That really it's used today to just refer to a museum or collection of dogmas, but that the tradition of Christianity is about the ongoing apocalypse or unveiling or revealing of Jesus, or of the God made, that he believes made manifest in Jesus. And that he's essentially saying that you have to resist two things. One, thinking that following and being a part of the Christian tradition means you believe what people said a long time ago and it never changes, or that it just kind of develops gradually over time, but that it's subject to breakthroughs, to significant ruptures, and that if you don't have a tradition that can surprise you still, like if you don't view yourself as a part of a living tradition, then you're really just looking at a museum. And that's really the key, is that it's the difference between being a part of a living tradition versus just being a part of something you're looking at that happened. And so when you look at the early church and Gnosticism and Irenaeus through that lens, I prefer to think about it as like a group of people trying to work out what they believe to be
Figure it out and
true.
establish
Yeah,
their
Yeah.
own.
they're
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. I mean, just like when you read the Old Testament with that lens, that's really obvious that's what's happening, because in a matter of a couple chapters, you can have like the exact opposite message being taught. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
these were clearly, when you read the prophets versus when you read, stuff written from the perspective of the rulers, I mean, things don't get much different. Reading Nehemiah and reading Amos is like reading night and day. And I think that there's so much to be said about just wanting to cut off ideas or people because we're like scared. Like, what are we scared of? What are we scared of
Exactly.
about learning about what the Gnostics might have thought? And even that, even saying the Gnostics is unbelievably reductionistic, because there wasn't one group called the Gnostics. There were like dozens and dozens of competing frameworks within
Yeah.
Gnosticism that predate Christianity, and then versions of Gnostic Christians.
Yeah.
And
If
so,
anything, their only official title would be heretic from the view of the Orthodox Church. That's the only, if you want to get real reductionist, that's their title. But
You
yeah.
you could even say too, like the establishment of modern day Christianity that we have today, especially our literature side of the Christianity, all came from one of these off sect groups that established the Qumranites. They established all of their teachings in off group, out of the beaten pathway areas of Qumran, and buried a lot of their and established a lot of their writings and scribes inside of pottery works that we then find 3,000, 2,000 years later. That all came from one of those subgroups. So what we take
Yeah.
now as established, Dead Sea Scrolls, it's written here, this is what was practiced by everyone.
Naj
That was being practiced by a far
Mhm.
off, group living in the hills.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
then I think it's important before we drone too far about what we know, right? Because we're interested in this. So I think it's important to establish ourselves in, like, when we talk about Gnosticism, when we talk about the Orthodox Church in its beginnings, that a lot of this we wouldn't have even known about uh, if it was not for the discovery of the Naj Hammadi back in the 1940s. And I think that it's crazy. To me, it's crazy that it's not spoken about as much as the Dead Sea Scrolls are. Um, but essentially, the only thing we really had that was, you could say, Gnostic, or the knowledge, right? The Gnostic texts, was the Gospel of Thomas, and then there was a few other smatterings of stuff that we had found. But back in the 1940s, it's this guy, Muhammad Ali, who, in the midst of a blood feud because his father had just died, there's this crazy like story about how this like the um the Gnostic Gospels were found at this location, Naj Hammadi,
Mhm.
right? And it's only really by happenstance that we even came upon these, because in the midst of like some land disputes and stuff, this family starts they were trying to dig deeper to get to the fertile soil to help with their farm, right? And so they dig just deep enough, they hit this pot, and then they find all these codices, right? And then, we carbon date them, and we date them back to around the time of 400, or anywhere ranging from like 150 to 400 CE, right?
Mhm.
And the kind of thing how it ends at 400 CE is then right at the time of the adoption of Christianity as the religion for the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
So it's cool to me. So when I look at that, I go, oh, well, these were obviously a threat to power then, because before that, Christianity was a persecuted religion, you could say, right? Until it was officially adopted by uh, Constantine, religion or Christians did face persecution. They faced martyrdom. Uh, so I look at that as like, oh, well, I want to learn more about this because I've always been someone like, I want to know like what threatens the establishment. I want to know what threatens power. So just the fact that the last date coincides with the Second Council of Nicaea, right? The Second Council in 350, 360, or the
Chalcedon,
first, it's the Nicene Council, right?
325 AD. Yeah.
So because it correlates so well with when that happened and when then Christianity actually was, then you could say a religion of power. What was found within the Naj Hammadi texts really, I think, is powerful, right? Because you have these, then it gives more of the story, because before we only had Irenaeus's uh, uh,
Universal
criticisms
heresies.
of
Yeah.
Gnosticism and labeling them heretics, right? And I actually, it's funny because I remember when I first learned about this, and especially the idea that the Gnostics believe of the trapped divine spark. So our perfect divine spark in an imperfect material world. I remember I was talking to some family members about that, right? And they're like, that's heresy. I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, is it now? So it's like it's stumbling upon stuff that is rather important. And it's kind of funny because then that the label that has like gone away, because Gnosticism, or what we call the Gnostics, then kind of went underground. So
Mhm.
it's funny that they went underground, but then as soon as that they're unearthed again, the same term heretic is still being applied to the contemporary.
Yeah.
So
But tell me what you think about this, because far from thinking that the Gnostics were heretics, I was raised in a world, and not just the world I was raised in, but I think the broader evangelical, especially charismatic evangelical world, anybody involved in dispensationalism may not even know what Gnosticism is, but I think they essentially function in a Gnostic way, like with their metaphysics of themselves, if not beyond, if not like their concept of God, like they may not be there like with the demiurge and stuff, but I I think a lot of Christians in America today think about salvation as we are trapped, we are spiritual beings trapped in physical matter, and that when
correct.
Jesus comes back, he's going to free us from that, and we will be saved on some ethereal spiritual plane that is our true home of existence. Would you agree with that?
I I would definitely agree with that, from the fact that I think that it's, even though I grew up, first I grew up in Catholic church and I grew up in the evangelical church, and the concept to me, even like being in that building, the concept to me of like the bodily resurrection over like the spiritual resurrection never made sense. It's like, well, but like we live here, I can't see like I can't see the physical resurrection, but I can kind of wrap my mind around the fact that, like, getting into the philosophical idea of humans, right? When you look at metaphysics of humanity versus, you could say lesser beings, right? Like that there's something different, and the spirit is that different piece. So yeah, it
Hmm.
would be the spirit that would be liberated from the body. So yeah.
I think a lot of Christians, as a blanket term nowadays, to see that salvation comes kind of from an inherited right. I want to say, which is kind of a weird thing to say because I don't believe that, but that the all their sins will be washed away upon the second coming, or their ascension or something like that. And I think that it the current Christianity, the current white Christians in the United States, a lot of them see that they can do no wrong,
Hmm.
and where
Because
like
it's
you
rooted
see,
in the patriarchy, rooted in
yeah,
that
it's
papal
like
system.
when you see too, how they're willing to put things and say, well, I'm doing this in the name of X, Y, and Z of their religion, rather than good acts or faith or acts of community service or things like that as being verifying to v- v- solidify their ascension. In my mind, I think that a lot of them think that it's just inherited, that they're going to be saved anyway, and I think that that's a really modern viewpoint. People in the past didn't have that viewpoint.
Hmm.
No, and the Gnostics definitely believed that, right? The So the gnosis literally means knowledge, right? Greek for
Right.
knowledge.
Secret
So
knowledge keepers.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the Gnostics would argue that you have to go through that. They believe that the resurrection is something that happens within you in the here and now on this earthly plane to cause your consciousness to rise up, to give you the Christ consciousness, the anointed kind of consciousness. And then you can proceed on, right? Where, yeah, they definitely then saw, like, especially in the face of martyrdom, about when they were, when Orthodox Christians were being persecuted. And um, that's one of Arrhenius's problems with the Gnostics is that, or the heretics, he would say, is that they didn't see themselves as martyrs. They didn't want to die for their beliefs. Um, and they saw the martyrdom. So essentially, if you take an Orthodox Christian at the time who was not to have achieved the gnosis yet, then they're saying, well, you're just dying for nothing. You're literally dying to serve the demiurge, the cannibal god, right? So yeah, they definitely believe that you have to get that knowledge beforehand, and then that'll lead you into your spiritual path that Jesus represents for them.
Yeah. Mm. So let me ask you guys a question. So I think that, and are both of you in the same wavelength regarding Gnosticism, Randall and John, or do you guys have you talked about that a lot, or do you have differing opinions?
No, we haven't really
I
talked about it
Probably not.
together very as much as we should probably before having a super in-depth discussion. But I I think that to be honest,
I did my research. I did my research. I picked this topic because I saw that you had posted something about it, and it's
Demiurge,
something that
yeah.
speaks to me. So
I think that a lot of my views are based in just I don't know. It's kind of weird to say, but it's kind of based in like historical fact and historical opinions that people
Mm,
kind of praise and bring to the forefront. And so when you look at that in like a religious sense, there's a huge bastardization from fact and belief. And so you see a lot of people that'll say, right now, it was with stuff that's happening in Iran, not to bring it to from religion to politics, but with stuff that's happening in Iran,
it's
you see,
applicable.
our Secretary of Defense has white nationalism, um, uh, pseudo crusader tattoos,
yeah.
and those come from a religious point. He got those because of a religious point. And so like when you know the history of those religious first world Christian states, early Christian states after the crusader states, excuse me, um it kind of makes the whole thing seem very comical. I say this a lot. It's when you see a white nationalist person scream about how they're descendant of Anglo-Saxon culture, and as a historian, the Anglo-Saxons were like bred out of existence in the early 1100s. So I hear that and I'm like, what do you
What does that
think
mean?
you're saying? You know what I mean? So it's the same kind of thing with Christianity, where I'll hear someone talk about something that they hold or hold to a high regard or esteem, and I know like the more of the history, the historiography of that event or idea, and then it kind of opens to my interpretation to different viewpoints than they'd be willing to accept because of the dogmas of their religion.
Hmm. I think that, yeah, well, one, absolutely. I think that's like the right framework that kind of governs the whole conversation, like especially with what John is talking about regarding the rejection of Gnosticism, right, wholesale. Because, and John, do you feel like that came about? Because obviously it starts way before Nicaea with Irenaeus, right? So, do you feel like that came about because of a desire to have institutional capture, or do you think that, far be it from us to impute intention upon a first
Right.
century
Well,
person, but uh, do you think he's like genuinely writing out of philosophical objections to Gnosticism, or do you
I th-
think that there is like institutional capture desire?
I think that it's twofold. So I think that the political institution capture, I think, comes from the fact that while Christians are being persecuted and dying for professing their faith, the Gnostics say, why die so needlessly, right? Like, especially because you do not have the true knowledge of the way of the universe, why die so needlessly? So Irenaeus comes, I feel like, from this perspective that they go, well, we've been here, we've shed blood for the church. So therefore, and they root their authority from Peter, right? They root their authority from the apostolic lineage, right? So they say, right, all these people have been killed. We are the ones that have been here and who've been the shepherd for the flock while you sit on your high horse, because there's some level of the Gnostics that the Orthodox Church like labeled them as like bohemian and labeled them as like these lofty thinkers, right? And it kind of is that, right? And like I don't want to put us on a pedestal, but we're having like these conversations. We're having the conversations that what the Orthodox would say is the laity, right? Like we are the laity, but we're having these conversations, right?
Mhm.
So the criticism then from Irenaeus to the Gnostics was that, well, you guys have a two-tiered initiate as well. You have the unknowing and the knowing. You have the salvation through the knowing, right? And then the Gnostics would obviously say, well, you have your two-tiered system as well. You have the clergy and the laity.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so I think it's twofold that he's criticizing them. And it mainly comes from, the fact that he views them as not having spilt blood for the cause. And right, like, and that's where I kind of think that it leads then now into Christian nationalism, right? So like at its root, Christianity is a religion of persecution until it gets picked up by power, right? But the fear of that persecution that is within the roots of Orthodox Christianity, I think propels then the like spirit of Christian nationalism, because, right, like it comes from fear, right? It comes from fear of persecution, in my opinion.
So Irenaeus has been basically calling them posers. Like he was like,
Yeah.
"You're not about." He was like, "Y'all aren't about this life."
Yeah. Like you haven't spilt blood. So, and we have, so we're going to take it. We're going to take up the papacy, or we're going to take up the apostolic lineage from here.
So I'm super open. If you guys have seen any of my content, you probably can tell that like there's not like a bone in my body that is dogmatic in the sense of like, no, this is a sacred cow. You can't come for this. But I've always been very. I agree with like Hart. Right, focuses on
Oh,
talks a
there's
lot
Hart
about.
again. It
I
is
know.
again.
I know. Well, because I didn't finish the idea from earlier, but about.
He better be getting, some credits in this.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I've stolen too much from him. The credit bank is probably reversed in the other way quite a bit. Somebody has to pay somebody, but is when he talks about the Gnostics, he thinks that they're like overly demonized and that like pushed out for getting things wrong, that they didn't necessarily get things wrong, and that there's things that they got right that the church needs to seriously consider today. But still, my points of contention within Gnosticism, I think, are still there within him as well. And it's funny to hear you say, and it makes total sense why. Like your reasoning and rationale is perfectly, makes perfect sense about that, reminding you of Christian nationalism. For me, Gnosticism has always represented like the right wing bent or leaning of Christianity in the
Oh,
contemporary
you think
age.
so?
Yeah, well, I don't know, and so I'm interested in having this like maybe I can like have it a
I
shift in
definitely
perspective.
I definitely would say that the Gnostics are, I would say, the more the academic, like the academia, right? So, and it goes so far as to within, so Orthodoxy took up root based on Pagel's analysis. Orthodoxy took up such a strong hold compared to Gnosticism because it appealed to the middle class of of that contemporary time, because within the middle class there was subservience, and there was you could say the subservience of the female, right? And but it goes further, and we kind of see that in the today, where there's this emerging middle class, the Christian nationalism perspective, right? Like there's all the red pill stuff and the trad wives and everything that is from the Christian nationalist perspective right now, where back in the day, their contemporaries, and you can kind of see this today, the low class, the poor, right? There was, I think Gnosticism appealed to the poor because they did not make the distinction women could be part of the clergy within the Gnostic tradition, right? So they had when they were performing, so they went to Orthodox church and then they had their own church as well, kind of on the side, where they would actually draw lots and they would each take turns playing different members of the church. So it meant that, and a woman could be, say, the priest for that sermon. And that happened in the low class, but then it also happened within high society too. So the Gnostics, I think, then appealed to, you would say, like the traditional contemporary liberal. And I don't know what the word that Irenaeus would have used for it, but uh, a- appealed to the high class as well, because there was already an elevation of women within more educated families, within families from means, right? Like the women would tend to have more power than, say, the middle class. But with the low class, it was all hands on deck, right? Because you had women performing duties that men would, just because you need all the help you can get in a poverty stricken area. So yeah, I would definitely make the argument that the Gnostics are, you would say, like the more liberal, right? Like the poor, right? A lot of, poor folks, if I would say, if they're not brainwashed by the right, tend to be liberal. And then high class, right? Like people who come from some means, people who do go to universities and stuff. So yeah, I would definitely make the argument is the inverse.
The flip of that.
I
So
I would
Yeah.
I would find it really difficult to establish either of them in
interesting.
comparison with today's political spectrum.
Well, I think of, go ahead, Randall. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I just think because of the ins and outs of a second century AD, person's life in put him in this day and age and try to find what side of the political spectrum. I don't
I
think
would I would agree wholeheartedly with
I don't
that.
think it's even comparable.
I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean more so about the application of some Gnostic ideas today, like the way that some of those ideas are applied in thinking today, specifically about the duality of nature, of uh, matter being intrinsically evil, right? Like
Hmm.
if there is a divine spark of life trapped within us, and the whole goal, the whole trajectory of salvation is to escape this material plane, this material prison. When I look at like attitudes towards things like climate change, like almost all eco theology that I read has something to do with, like, talks about the importance of understanding the sacrity, or this what's the sacrity? I don't think that's a word. The sacredness of
Yeah.
the physical
Sanctity.
world, the sanctity. Thank you, of the physical and material world.
Yeah, so it, I guess for me, it goes back to my understanding of Christianity, is that we're here to be saved, right? And it's like, well, what were we here to be saved from? So I think this is a good time to then talk about, I think, how Christianity's root within, right, the lens of the prophets within the Old Testament or the Torah, right? And how Jesus was brought into that worldview. Um, I think so. We got to kind of back up when we talk about Gnosticism, about the Gnostics, the pre-Christian Gnostics and the Gnostics of, you would say, the Christian Gnostics, believed that the Old Testament God, the how do you say it? Uh,
Tetragrammatron.
tetragrammatron, is the demiurge, is the imperfect creator, right? Um, and I'm speaking from my perspective. We spoke off camera a little bit about how when I sent you questions, I was apologize, because it's coming from a place of superiority, but it's just because it makes sense to me. It might not make sense to other people, so my bias shown there a little bit. But then when you have the idea of Jesus, I feel, because Jesus was a threat to, say, the Old Testament powers, it makes, for me, the idea of an
Mhm.
imperfect creator makes sense, because Jesus was here to remind us of our divine being, right? So it just in my mind, it makes sense. And then also you talk about like the science aspect then in today's day and age with all the stuff like simulation theory, right? Makes sense, because if this is just uh a temporary, prison for the divine spark, who's to say it's not just a simulation? I think Gnosticism definitely speaks to the contemporary with that, with simulation theory too. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I can see that. Randall, what do you think?
I confessedly don't know very much about simulation theory at all. So I was just listening to that, and I thought that was kind of out of left field. But can you maybe explain simulation theory to me in a quick synopsis?
Me? You
Yeah,
want me
go
to
for it.
explain it? Yeah, so simulation theory essentially that this is not our base reality, or this is not what then Jesus is saying he's liberating us to, right? So the simulation theory supports that this is a projection of something, right? But then if you believe that, kind of like Colton was talking about with the idea of God not being some sky daddy or sky mommy, my wife would say that she's very upset that it's the sky daddy, because if
Yeah.
anything, it's a sky mommy, right?
No, I
Um,
would never impugn the sky mommy, you know.
so it, well, I lost where I was going there, but so the simulation essentially is, so when you then kind of mix simulation theory within our point of consciousness, if Colton, you were kind of making the argument where, what's your philosopher's name again? Hart,
David
talk,
Bentley Hart, yeah.
talking about how God is essentially then consciousness. So like this consciousness is somehow in this simulation, right? So for it, I wish I had done a better job at kind of prepping this, but the Gnostic idea, it just makes more sense to me with what we're being fed from contemporary theories of consciousness and reality as well. So,
I think a lot of the histories too that we get fed when it comes to all forms of Christianity under that umbrella term again, um, about, Jesus specifically in the first test or the New Testament is very not manufactured in a bad way, but manufactured and presented to us and curated as these are the things we want to cover. And there's a lot of stuff that has been left out of that we as exploring, theological philosophy Christians might have found extremely helpful to have the information that someone, 3 or 400 to 500, 700 years ago was like, oh, let's take that story out.
Yeah.
Um, like the beginning of his teachings happening when he was 32 years old. Um, there's a really good documentary that leaves a lot of things. I brought him up before on this podcast, Simha Jakupovic, which is
Mm.
he's a documentarian filmmaker and stuff out of Canada. He's Jewish, and he does a lot of first century archaeology in that area of the world, the Levant. And he has an interesting theory too that I think would turn a lot of Christianity on its head, where it's a theory that Jesus in his early Christian days, or excuse me, Christian days, but early baptistry days and practicing, went to Spain and traveled to Spain. And they have first century traditions in eastern south, southern parts of Spain near Cadiz, that they were visited by Jerusalem, or not Jerusalem, excuse me, Jesus before his trip to Jerusalem. And that's all based in lore and stuff, right? But the idea of this, the whole reason why I would turn it on its head is because the idea is the story that Jesus could fail in his ministries, is that he could go to a place and try to preach his ministries and be turned away and basically told get out of Dodge. And that's something that concept of the failure of Jesus in ministries hasn't really been thought of or preached about. And a lot of, Christians nowadays, if they look at that, they would be like, well, obviously it didn't happen. Jesus couldn't fail. Like
yeah,
that mindset. And so like leads me to wonder, what are other things that could have been, and I'm not saying that, I believe whether or not the whole going to Spain is literary fact, but
Sure, sure, sure.
the point is how many other things could have been taken out of the historical context that actually happened or were important to know, that then we were robbed of that understanding, but then the ideas and some other parts of it still remain.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And by the way, like that idea is right there in the Bible, and it's still not talked about very often of Jesus failing, right? Like it says that the prophet is without honor in his hometown. When Jesus went to Nazareth, he was unable to perform miracles, right? He tried to perform miracles could not do them. But
Stage
again,
fright for his hometown.
yeah, stage right.
Yeah.
His teenage crush was there, and he got cold. He got nervous.
Got really
Um,
nervous.
yeah,
I gotta be
but yeah,
careful
you're
because some
right.
people could be really mad if we're making fun of that. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I apologize, guys.
No, no,
Uh,
no, no. I'm saying
pray,
for
pray, pray
our
for me.
audience. Yeah,
No, yeah, I'm saying to your audience, I
yeah,
apologize. Pray for me. But I think that Randall, like somebody will ask me, like, "Oh yeah, well, if this is a possibility, why didn't Jesus ever speak on this?" And I'm like, dude, the guy was alive for 33 years, and I can read everything we have him reportedly saying in an afternoon, like in 6 hours. I think it
Yeah,
would take
and that's just
me
of
to read
what's
through
left.
it.
That's just of what made the director Floor's cut, right?
That's
yeah.
right, and that was all editorially chosen, largely
Through
based off
multiple
of
language translations. Yeah,
through multiple translations, and largely based off of copying one book. Like most of the Gospels were copying Mark. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like
Mark and Q.
they're just making slight additions to or changes, editorial choices. So yeah, I think that there's really so much. That's why for me the most interesting part of Christianity is the philosophical tradition that really comes from Neoplatonic thought, which is where you
Yeah.
get most of Eastern Orthodox theology, and comes from them dealing with thinking through Platonic ideas and rejecting some, right? And I think that largely a part of what was rejected was some of the ideas that specifically had to do with the demiurge creating versus a larger God, because it came it bounced off of the idea or the concept of God that was being developed, of God as act,
of
of
divinity.
or of God as pure consciousness, or of being itself subsisting, God of pure act. That, like, if what God is, because the interesting thing about Gnosticism for me is the biggest question that it talks about, and the biggest answer is it talks about the demiurge. Would And you do learn a lot more, right? When you get into Valentinian Gnosticism, et cetera, you learn about the monad and the divine pleroma of beings that exist that kind of give weight to all of this. What it doesn't really get at is that central question of what is the basis of the existence, what's holding existence together, right? Because there's a difference between a God who just creates and acts, and then the thing that undergirds the whole thing. And a lot of it comes down to, I think, that rejection that they had, resurrection. And John, I saw you getting at this in some of your questions, so be curious to see where you were wanting to maybe take the conversation regarding Gnosticism, Orthodox Christianity, specifically within regards to resurrection, because I think that really is kind of the linchpin.
Yeah. So, right, that's where within Gnosticism we talk about. So you first got to go back and you have to understand that there are seeds of Gnosticism within the New Testament as well, right? Within the Gospels of Luke and Mark, the seeds for the Gnosticism is planted because it describes Jesus appearing in another form, not in his physical body, right? So that is already there, and the Gnostic faith or the Gnostic texts really take that and run with it and talk about that it's not the see me, touch me, right? It's like, and it talks about then, I can't remember, and Colton, this is a question for you. Within the New Testament, there kind of is some debate, scholarly debate, on who Jesus appeared to first between the Gospels, right? Because is it not that Jesus appears first to Mary Magdalene, right?
Hmm.
Within the Gospels?
Mary,
Hmm. It depends on which book you're reading, right? Like
Yes.
we
I was
said,
supposed to say, yeah,
So it's within it with Mark and Luke, I believe that she appears to Mary first, correct?
yes.
And so then what the Gnostic faith then, so then within the Gnostic text, it talks about an expanded conversation about Mary and Peter. So essentially, Mary talks about other things that Jesus did not say in his living days. And Peter says, "Did you just think this up? Or how did you get this?" She's like, "Peter, do you really think I would lie to you? Do you think I would try and fabricate this story?" And it's said that Peter then gets hostile. So within these Gnostic texts, I can't remember exactly which one got the Gospel of Truth um, or the Gospel, if it might be from the Gospel of Philip, where then one of the other apostles calls out Peter and says, Peter, you've always had a temper, right? You've always had a temper. Why are you questioning Mary Magdalene on what she's saying? So, so the idea then of the resurrection, the seeds that are planted within Mark and Luke is with Jesus not being in that form, not being in the physical form, leads to then that is taken and run with, right? And that then becomes a schism between then orthodoxy and Gnosticism. And that's also one of the reasons why within orthodoxy, they hold on to the physical resurrection because it also then leads to martyrdom, the blood death of the martyrdom. And then that is essentially then something that the Orthodox Church is established with, then compared to the Gnostics, like we've talked about, is the spiritual revelation rather than the physical revelation and physical resurrection. So they don't believe that the physical resurrection has to happen for you to achieve salvation. So,
Okay. Yeah, I think so. To me, I don't know, man. Like, I'm an atheist. I don't believe any of it,
yeah.
which is it's kind of funny that we get at this. Somebody goes like, well, "Why do you even care?" It's like, go to a Star Trek convention and ask them why they care if they don't really believe it, right? Like,
Meanwhile, you're talking to a guy that has a bat'leth on the wall behind him.
yeah, dude. Like, they're debating like the finer points of like Klingon grammar, and you're like, yeah. And
And
so for
why?
me,
So, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, John.
So then, and I believe that too in a sense, right? Like we're in this world, and it's like there's all these like all this conflict going on and stuff. It's like we're all rooted in just these ancient traditions that are putting us at odds with each other. It's like why can't we just then overcome and get to this state where we can just get along, right? So, and I think but I think like we're talking about with Christian nationalism, you're talking about the linchpin of the resurrection with the Gnostics, is that then and then Irenaeus's claimed heresy of the Gnostics because they did not take up in the blood of Christ through martyrdom, right? That leads to then like what we're saying with like Randall talking about Pete Hegseth, right? And then the rising Christian nationalism here in America is that they're like, I look at this like I care about this because I think that it explains where we're headed as a country. Because I think the the Orthodox mindset of when you take when you take communion, right? So drinking of the blood, eating of the body, it then if that is the tenet of Orthodox, in my mind, it's almost that's like a blood sacrifice ritual. Um, and there are then like s- people don't even know that they are then participating in that, and that there can be consequences because of that. One of those consequences is then you when someone from bu- when someone from the Christian faith then is trying to steer you in like this direction of Christian nationalism or like we have to go fight Iran and we got to go fight these, Muslims, right? Like
Mm.
they will persecute us if we don't fight them. It's rooted in that fear, right? The fear that stemmed from martyrdom and the fear that's I think even stemmed from the aspect of the physical resurrection.
Hmm.
I think that there's a lot of decisions, like you could say that the time where, it comes down in Mark and excuse me, Mark and John, was it that he comes to Mary first
Mark
and
and
other
Luke.
Mark and Luke, that he comes to Mary first and other women, and then the others, it says it comes to Peter as the first male that he appeared to. I think that some people might see that as like, a huge schism in the religions. As one people see it as a metaphysical reality of Jesus appearing, and other people see it as like a physical. And I think that too that there's maybe it boils down. Colton, like you said, you're an atheist. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with religion. It just boils down to patriarchy and sexism.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that people were upset that it says in the Bible that he would appear to a woman. And in that time, patriarchy is a really real thing, and they wanted it to write it down that he would appear to a man. So then that causes a schism for people that believe in practice and people that believe in what's written, and then that breaks down and fumbles down the line to our day where we're sitting here talking and discussing, being like, well, maybe there's, people that did it because of this far off reason, when in reality it's based on something so much more simpler that humans contend with every single day, and it's just outright sexism.
That's what I tend to think is that
Personally, I do
most
too.
yeah, is that most of these choices are editorial decisions rooted in the dominant ideologies of their time, right? Like I wrote recently about the question of homophobia in Pauline literature, right? Like is Paul,
Mm,
because
very
one thing you hear a lot of progressive scholars say is Paul couldn't have been homophobic because homosexuality is a contemporary modern framework that didn't exist in the first century. They only thought about sex in terms of male and male penetrative sex in terms of um, abuse, ritualistic abuse, or master slave dynamic, or other exploitative contexts. And what I was trying to say is, uh, I mean, maybe, but that probably also just existed there. And let's just say we accept that, right? So what they'll want to tell you is that's not homophobia because Paul wasn't rejecting a natural same sex orientation between two individuals of the same sex. Paul was saying that if a male was on the receiving side of penetration, that he was feminized. And I'm like, okay, if somebody said that today, what would we call that? We'd call that homophobic. Like I don't know, like
homophobic. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know what we're trying to do here, right? Like the dude was homophobic for different reasons than some people are homophobic today, maybe, but also who doesn't believe in a natural disposition of sexual attraction between two people as a stable orientation. Current homophobes today don't believe that that's a real thing. They believe
I
it's
can
like some kind of
I
a
can
sin.
think of another perfect example of that we would talk about in I took a class in college with John's favorite teacher, Fenicis, Antonios
Yeah,
Fenicis.
Went to Greece with him. Yeah, it was fun.
Um and it was called Sex in the Hebrew Bible, and it was all about different acts of what we would term to nowadays as sexual activity, and that's present throughout the Hebrew Bible. And one of them specifically that brings to mind when the topic of homophobia and this gets preached about all the time in Christianity nowadays is the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah,
hmm
and what was happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, and when the angels came down to Lot, and Lot welcomed them into his home as a first century Aramaic man would, because that's, you treat your guests with
hospitality. Yeah,
upright hospitality. And so then the story goes in the English translations of the books that a mob gathers outside their home, and they pound on his door and they say, bring these people out so that we can have sex with them. That's what it says in the book, and that's because these cities were so deviant. They wanted to have sex with everybody in Sodom and Gomorrah. But what it actually says in Hebrew, before translation, is bring them out so that we may know them. And to know somebody is different. And honestly, if it goes back to that sense of hospitality, that the rest of the city would be essentially shamed if they weren't allowed to express their hospitality to the guests entering their small communal towns. But it gets bastardized into this: bring them out so that we can have sex with them, and it
Mm,
becomes a tale of homosexuality, and why those cities were wiped off the face of the earth. It's because they practice homosexuality, and so it
right.
breeds a lot further away from the actual story that took place, because you can just change small verbiage, in translation, and then it gets picked up by people in the, like, again, not to keep going back to white nationalism, but it gets picked up by people who want to use that story that now exists for their alternative meats.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And I think when we come back to the conversation about Gnosticism and talking about it as we're with Randall's point of like I think that he thinks that a better explanation might just be that it was like rooted in the times. I tend to think that as well. I think John, for me, I have a really hard time with specifically the dualism in Gnosticism of like learning to see our embodied reality as like something that is ultimately evil or to be done away with, which is something
Hmm.
that to me is the reason I care about theology so much is because I believe that uh, what Christians believe about their faith informs our politics to a degree that radically impacts everybody else around us.
Of
And so
course,
like
yeah.
when we hear stories about like generals and commanders or commanders in the military telling their soldiers that we're going to Iran so that we can, spark Armageddon and have like a third temple built
Oh my
in
God.
Jerusalem. Like
The
I
red
see,
heifer and
yeah, I see
Yeah,
all of
I brought that up.
when I talked earlier about like how the world I brought up in felt like very Gnostic focus, like very Gnostic like oriented. I see that as a like that story as a symptom of that, right? I see that as like they view this world like who cares? Like if you talk to a lot of evangelicals or charismatics or Pentecostals about global warming or about like what's happening around the world, the response is, well, Jesus is coming back soon, so we don't have to worry about it. He's going to destroy this whole world anyways. We're going to be taken out of here. And I want to say, like, I'm curious, like, what would a theology that takes the material world seriously, how would that impact the way that Christians engage in the world? Is
I,
one of
th- I
my
think that I think that they would continue to act in the way that they're acting. I think that a lot of it is unfortunately
yeah.
a religion of convenience for them nowadays, where they take the parts of the Bible like they want, or they take the parts of their speeches and sermons they get from their religious leaders, and they take the parts they like, and they discard the parts that they don't. I brought it up in a former podcast that John and I did with a contrarian, where he was saying that the temple should be built and rebuilt, and we should help in that fact. And I said, well, it would all be pointless. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, we don't have a purebred red heifer. Those went extinct in like the 1700s. So
I
we
saw this
can't have the
article that
sacrifice
I
in
saw
order
this
to
article though
cleanse the
that they're
hands of the
trying
people that enter the
to
temple.
re-engineer though. They're trying to
they
get
are,
that
yeah,
back.
that's a
That's
thing.
fucking scary. All right,
Yeah.
Since
takes my
that's been
point
in the
away.
works, I mean, I don't know if it's conspiratorial articles or
But
not.
just
Colton, you've probably seen those too.
no,
They are
knowing
trying to bring it back.
knowing those parts about how uh that era of religion was practiced, because we're talking pre-destruction of the second temple. The there is no connection to that life stream of like first century, even before ideals. Anything we have that will be passed down has been bastardized. Even in the Torah, sure, the verbiage and the words of the Torah haven't changed, as they have very well pointed out and shown that a lot of the Torah matches Dead Sea Scrolls from the Qumranites. But even that's an offset shot, like I was saying before, of first century or second century Judaism into Christianity. The connections with biblical times and the building of the third temple and bringing upon the apocalypse, it doesn't. I don't see the people who have the ability to practice that dark magic.
I
Do you
think
know what
that
I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
yeah, I see your
The
point,
connection to it
Randall.
is lost.
I think that, and I would kind of piggyback off to answer your question, Colton. I think I would piggyback more off of Randall, as in I think I see that more in just I feel like I see that more, I think, in what Randall's talking about with just the salvation through faith, right? Like I can, I can just accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and then I can do whatever I want. That's where I see more of like the nihilism come into play, is within Christian, I would say, than Christian nihilism, rather than
Yeah,
like rather
I
than
agree.
the rather than the imperfect world aspect of the Gnostics. I think that
Well, not imperfect, like evil and needs to be done away with and destroyed.
right. So
Like if
I
that's
don't
like
think
if that's your underlying
I don't think
belief,
that's the I don't I I haven't heard that side of Gnosticism where it's evil and needs to be done away with. It's just that it is, and this is how it is, and this is what you have to do
yeah.
now. I haven't heard of the it's evil and needs to be done away with. What is that you're referencing within Gnosticism?
I mean, that's my understanding of like the basic framework is that like the demiurge like created material reality as a prison, like is essentially like a torture chamber for the divine spark. Then like we all kind of came down into these bodies, and now the
Right.
goal is to get out of here. Like this world is not our home, and I'm like, hey, this world is kind of our home. Like
Yeah, we don't have a. I would say there's
We
a
seem to be pretty
difference.
well developed for this world.
Yeah, it's like, but we don't have a choice in it though, right? So like we have to. I think that there's like just the solace. There's like a solace that comes to mind with like the well, and that's why there's so much crossover then too between Orthodox and Gnostics too, because there is then something to look forward to in the next. And for me personally, I don't think that it would take that path of like, well, we just do whatever we want while we're here, because then it also gets into like we're trapped here with the divine spark of the knowing of good and evil, right? With the eating from the apple, so eating from the tree of knowledge. So we then are tasked within our own, we're tasked with our own experience while we're here. Um, yeah, but I do see what you're saying. It's just that I think that my morality then rather than religion would steer me away from like just saying fuck this shit, like I'm going to do what I want while we're here or destroy the
Right.
world or so. Yeah.
I think there's just like a big connection for a lot of people between, especially in the evangelical world, between what they feel to be right and what they think they are allowed to believe is right based on their theology. And I know I
Yeah.
was held back on that for a long time in a lot of different areas. And then like I kind of needed like theological permission at each iteration in my journey to kind of break into like, is it even okay? Like me talking about in the beginning, walking in and
Right.
seeing these Obama and Clinton posters and being like, this is a thing that you can do as a Christian. Like, even despite having some sensibilities inwardly that leaned more in that direction, I felt like I had to suppress those. And I
Yeah.
agree, Randall, with what you said, with what I think you're saying, that for the vast majority of people, it's not going to, or for a lot of people, it's not going to matter, right? That their theology isn't what's influencing their politics. Their politics is influencing their theology. But I think that it's a little bit messier. I think it goes both ways. And I think that we have to remember we live in a reality where we don't have to change everybody's minds. Like people say this to me all the time, like, Colton, you're never going to change everyone's minds. I'm like, yeah, duh. Like, but we might change 1% of people's minds. And have we looked at what each election hinges on? Like we're talking about like a fraction of a percent in sometimes, right? In some states. And so I just I agree too, John, with you. Like I'm not hinging everything on that. Like I have way more affinity for aspects of Gnosticism than I do problems with that aspect. But I think like your idea about faith is another important one, which is why to me, like the doctrine of salvation within Christianity informs our politics and the way we view the world. If you have that kind of post-Reformation saved by faith Protestant soteriology or doctrine of salvation, it's going to lead to a lot of problematic ways because your imagination is held back by the frameworks that your imagination thinks it's allowed to think in. And
Right.
so, Eastern Orthodox salvation, what's the word? Soteriology, doctrine of salvation. It's much more compelling and interesting to me. This idea that God became man so that men can become God. That the reason that Jesus became incarnate was to essentially enter into humanity and allow humanity to become divine. That is the trajectory. You
Huh.
have then Maximus the Confessor and writing about his, because you have Jesus as the Logos, right? The divine rationality that undergirds all of creation becoming flesh and dwelling among us. He also talks about the logoi. So you have the logos and the logoi. And the logoi are like the underlying rationality that underpin all creatures, every rock, everything. And in Maximus the Confessor's framework, like the work of Christ, the redemptive work of Christ is cosmological. That it's not just about humans being saved; it's about the entirety of the earth being redeemed. That all of creation is moving that direction, which then opens the door in a lot of Orthodox theology to this theology they call theosis or deification, right? Which I alluded to earlier, God becoming men so that men can become God. That what we're here to do is not just have faith in God, but to actually start to live lives that are changing. And so like the Orthodox actually even believe that this happens to people in real life sometimes. Where like that there are saints who before they died experienced a transfiguration or perfection where they became fully deified.
Yeah.
Hart actually, go back to Hart, has this awesome essay where he talks about Buddhist rainbow bodies. And I don't want to mispronounce the word, but it's a specific kind of Buddhism in the Mahayana tradition where they believe that they're not priests, what do you call 'em, monks, that there are certain devout holy men in their faith that right before they die, their body converts to a body of pure light,
Hmm.
in spirit, and transforms into fractals of light that become like a rainbow body.
Yeah,
And Hart,
I've seen that before.
it's
Yeah,
interesting,
I've
right?
read
the
something about
astral
that before.
body, right?
Hart puts this idea forward that that maybe Jesus was the first rainbow body. That Jesus, because the
Yeah,
whole idea is that
yeah.
his resurrection is the resurrection we're all entering into, and that
The
these
Christ
Buddhist monks
consciousness,
are
yes.
experiencing. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And
The
so,
Kundalini, you
but
could say, with the Kundalini awakening within yogic principles and all that. And
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, and
And
I
so
think that
so there's a lot of
yeah, go ahead.
crossover. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, John. There's a
No,
lot of
no, you're good.
crossover with Vedic thought, Buddhist thought, Christian thought in the Platonic tradition, along with elements from like Gnosticism. I guess what I want to say is like Christians should not throw out Gnosticism for one or two objections, and that's why I was getting to that earlier. I wasn't trying to do a takedown. I was trying to say even for like me, even if you have like a specific objection to something like Gnosticism, like I do, you shouldn't allow that to become a wholesale then rejection of everything else we might learn from that tradition. Because
Right.
just like none of the other aspects of Christianity got everything right, the Gnostic Christians didn't get everything right. They were all part of like an ongoing conversation trying to understand the ongoing apocalypse or unveiling of this God that, as Joseph Campbell says, God is the word that of the blanket that we put over the mystery to give it shape, right? I think we
Yeah.
have to like think about it in those kinds of terms.
I think there's a funny comedian, I can't remember his name, where talks about like atheism versus like heaven, right? And he's like,
Some people think God created the universe. Some people think nothing created the universe, which is the funniest guess. And the nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, maybe. But you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That's the defining characteristic of nothing, is that it doesn't exist. So what are we talking about? Either you think it's God, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove, or you think it's nothing, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove. I think we can all agree, if your nothing sometimes spontaneously erupts into everything, that's a pretty goddamn magical fucking nothing, you guys. Ask the nothing people, what happens when you die? They'll tell you, nothing. You go into nothing. I'm like, you mean you merge back with your creator? That's heaven, bitch.
you describe yourself as an atheist, right? Like you kind of made the comment, like you don't, like you kind of think it's all just right, like it's all kind of hogwash. Like we don't know, like we don't know, right? Like so why? So can you like how? Could you explain a little bit like what you mean from an atheist perspective? What does that mean when you describe yourself as such? What does that mean for you?
So great question, John. So for me, it's not a dogmatic position. It's just being honest that I don't have faith in God. I don't. Maybe I would love to have that. That would be wonderful. I lost it along the way. And sometimes people ask me like, when did you lose your faith? And the truth is, I I think if I could answer that, then I might still have faith, because to me it's like, when did you lose your keys? I don't know. If I remembered, they wouldn't be lost. You know what I
That's
mean? Like
hilarious.
I would know exactly where they were. And I think I eventually just came to this realization where I finally felt comfortable saying it inwardly to myself and then saying it outwardly. But I call myself a Christian because I'm still very much a product and a member and a part of that community. You know what I mean?
For sure.
That of that conversation, and maybe I'm just having a different part of it. I've written about it in different places on my Substack in more detail, but I'm not interested in convincing anybody else to become an atheist. I don't even necessarily think it's all hogwash. I think a lot of it makes sense. I think it's just as much hogwash as dogmatic material mechanism, like or mechanistic materialism, rather. Like this idea that like we just are matter, that consciousness arises from matter seems to make less sense to me than the proposition that matter arises from consciousness. Um, and uh, but I don't believe in any other God. Um, I,
Colton, out of curiosity, have you heard of the Tel Piat tomb in eastern Jerusalem?
I have not.
Just to speak to more add more thought to the idea of, you know, the conscious or the metaphysicality or physicalness of Jesus's body and the divine, you know, combination thereof. In the early 1980s, there was a discovery in Eastern Jerusalem. They were building I think it was an apartment complex on top of some land. And so they have to do, whenever obviously in Jerusalem you do building construction, you have to do surveys underneath. They found a series of first century tombs that contained like 10 ossuaries, and it's called the Tel Piat tombs. But it was thought at the time to have been the tombs of Jesus's direct family. So there's ossuaries in there with names like like the biblical names, which obviously in first century Jerusalem, first century Levant, you'd have
More
tons of
common.
Marys
Yeah.
and tons of Josephs and such.
James and
James would be mentioned as well, and all these ossuaries were all found, and then they were all the archaeology was all shut down by the Israeli Antiquities Commission, and they closed the tomb and they resealed it. They didn't allow any investigation or archaeology to proceed. They were attempted to reopen them in like the mid 2000s, and again they were shut down because it was against Israeli Jewitic law to open a tomb and disturb the dead, and so they haven't allowed the the excavation thereof to proceed. But it's always been one of those kind of like what if things, and like who's keeping these tombs closed from investigation because the fear of what it would start in a theological discussion about the remains of Jesus's direct family if it was all true.
Yeah.
So, and this all might be just a hogwash, but it's something that's always been kind of thought as interesting when we're talking about the physicality of the divine. And if
Yeah.
there was remains in an archaeological historical sense, that would be impressively important to open and to discuss. But it's directly known exactly where they are. There's a manhole cover just outside of this tomb in an apartment building in East Jerusalem.
So funny.
And yeah, if you've never looked it up, that's again not to keep. We all just keep bringing up the same people, but I believe there was a documentary made about that, filmed by Simha Yakubovich that I've mentioned earlier. But yeah, just an interesting weird thing I thought I'd bring up because it speaks to the physical remains of
Yeah.
and archaeology of the area, which I think is
And
neat.
that is compelling, right? Like what would that mean
Yeah,
for
the
the
effects.
tradition?
One of the ossuaries was actually found with the only confirmed archaeological remains of crucifixion nails, which is interesting. That
It is, yeah.
there's never been nails discovered from a there's never been nails discovered from a crucifixion that are penetrating through bone, and the only evidence of that ever happening has been discovered. It was in one of the ossuaries in the tomb, which is again just really neat.
Well, that would be a real bummer because one of my favorite book series is the Dresden Files, featuring the wizard Harry Dresden, who is a private eye detective in Chicago and also a wizard. Because there are these bad guys, the Sacred Order of the Denarian, and they're fallen angels that. Their souls are all trapped within the 30 pieces of silver, and so if you take up one of those 30 pieces of silver, you become possessed by one of these demons. But likewise, there are these 3 knights of the cross who all have these like magic swords, and the swords are the hilt is one of the nails from the cross. So that would mean that would deal a devastating blow
To the sci-fi
to the sci-fi community.
Yeah, those nails have been sitting in a drawer in Tel Aviv somewhere for years. It's funny.
And I want to say before, because I know I told you guys I have to go in a second to get my kid from daycare, but one of the things I want to say is, John, I want to pivot back to something you talked about earlier and acknowledge it about in the Gospels, Jesus appearing in a non-physical body. And I think you're talking about post-resurrection. Right, in that spiritual body, that pneumatica soma, that spiritual body. And this is one of the interesting things from that Hart wants to really focus on, that a lot of Christians go, well, we're going to be re-resurrected into physical bodies just like ours. He's saying, well, Paul is, and this was in your questions earlier about, is there Gnosticism in Paul? Or do Gnostics later on use Pauline language to develop Christian Gnostic thought?
Yeah.
But
they call them proto-Gnostic, but yeah.
that you have this like idea of Jesus post-resurrection, Randall. He's like walking around and he's walking through walls saying he doesn't have blood, bone or flesh, but he's eating, he's touching. You know what I mean? He's appearing in one place and disappearing in another place. And what's interesting or compelling to me is this possibility that maybe it's not this distinction that we've created that you either become this pure spirit being or you become this pure, like just regular flesh and blood. But what if it's this like perfected or transfigured body, right? Like it talks about when he's on Mount Tabor, this uncreated light is seen shining from him. That I feel like that would be like a cool reality.
It's exactly like I said. It's exactly like I said before with the story with Lot and bring them out so that we can have sex with them or know them. A simple mistranslation in the books where it says something like, he approached him as a metaphorical sense. We might see that now and be like, it's a ghost. He's a spooky ghost. And then there's other people that are like, no, dude, it's a mistranslation. He's been enlightened. He is different. He's experienced something that's brought him to a different plane of thinking. And so they write it down and yeah, exactly. The translation.
Could be too that we're just dealing with the existential angst, right? Like I think that a lot of, like when I think of atheism, right, is like within existential angst and like looking into the abyss or like looking into the unknown. And just real quick, I wanted to mention, I know you got to get going, but there was this one quote I had that is from one of the texts of what they found at the Naj Hammadi. And it is the text called the Allogenes, which literally means the stranger or one from another race, where like once one has reached like that rainbow body, right? Like that they're indiscernible from the rest of the community or their prior selves, and kind of talks about like the Randall's arguing for like it could be just the mistranslation, right? I think that a lot of like our experience stems from like, you could say like that existential angst. And it says here, this is from the text called Allogenes, if you wish to stand, ascend to the existence, and you will find it standing and stilling itself. And when you receive a revelation and you become afraid in that place, withdraw back because of the energies. And when you have become perfect in that place, still yourself. Kind of just like a really poetic example of someone from long ago experiencing all these things we're talking about, battling with ideas, battling with existential angst, and not knowing, but having solace in the not knowing.
That's good, man.
It's a good spot to end.
Yeah,
Colten, appreciate you so much for coming on. We realize you got a hard stop because you got to go pick up your child from daycare.
As does Randall, and as does I too.
But it's pretty great. We appreciate you for coming on, and you're always welcome to come back and talk more. We can dive more into more fun topics.
Yeah, we can talk about heart. We got to talk about heart. Apparently,
I was gonna say I can do some research on heart before then, and that way I can dabble a little easier.
This would be a good conversation for beers. This is a good beers crew right here. Do a beers podcast.
If you have the time, I do highly recommend you check out Mr. Yakupovich and his. I
wrote it down so that I could check it out.
Simhan.
And more pagels, Colten.
A lot of you're gonna watch some of Simhan. You're gonna be like, "What the hell is this guy on?" But the topics of what he it talks about and the questions he asks brings a lot of things that people don't think about.
Would you DM me the spelling of that, because I probably didn't write it down correctly?
Absolutely, I will.
Awesome. Yeah, and John, I love Pagels actually. Her stuff on yeah. But all right, appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sitting at the wrong table.